Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 284 of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is sponsored by the Red Flag Group. The Red Flag Group is a business advisory, information services, and technological firm that helps clients manage risk across 4 key risk areas. These risk areas include sales and sales channels, including distributors, resellers, and partners, suppliers, customers, and human capital, which consists of employees and contractors. You can check out more information on the Red Flag Group at www.redflaggroup.com. The Red Flag Group will have its next webinar on using technology and analysis to manage your supply chain risks on October 20, 2016 at 11 a.m. Eastern. On this webinar, we will take a look at the issue of how combining the right software platform with bench strength will lead to better risk analysis and supplier communication. You can find out more information on this webinar at insights.redflaggroup.com. I hope you'll join us for our next webinar. It promises to be very interesting. In this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report, I visit with my good friend and FCPA Blog colleague, Mike Scher. Mike and I have both been writing on the Wells Fargo scandal. Mike takes a look at it from the compliance officer angle. So we talk about this. We also preview the upcoming FCPA Blog Conference in New York, which will be Wednesday, October 26th. If you would like more information on it, go to the website, fcpablog.com, events. For listeners of this blog, you can receive up to a 20% discount, and you can get information on that in the show notes. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I am here with my good friend and colleague, Mike Scher. Mike and I are going to be speaking on a panel at the upcoming FCPA Blog New York City Conference 2016, which is scheduled for a couple of weeks, I think, Mike.
Yep.
So I wanted to coming up. So I wanted to see if maybe we could do a podcast and preview what some of the things we wanted to talk about.
Sure.
You know, our session is entitled, "Who do compliance officers really work for, the company, the public, or the feds?" And we are privileged to be moderated by Julie Marno, so it's going to be great to have her on there as well.
That's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting.
So Dick Casson, who is the editor and founder of the FCPA blog, as you know, has put together just a fabulous agenda. He's got people from not only ourselves, but Delaney Brewer, Richard DeStrong, Mark Bone, Eric Carlson, Bill Waite, Bill Steinman, Andy Spalding, Artie Marjari, and it's going to be a fabulous one-day conference. I'm going to link to the registration agenda and information in my show notes so people will be able to check it out. And if you listen to this listen to this podcast, you're going to get a 20% discount, and I'll have that information in the show notes as well. But, yep. Mike, I know you and I have both been greatly intrigued by Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo. It's been in the news, on the television, everywhere.
And every year, at least since 2012, I have said compliance scandals cannot get any bigger. So in 2012, we had Walmart. In 2013, we had GSK in China. In 2014, we had Petrobras. In 2015, spring division, we had FIFA. In 2015, fall division, we had Volkswagen. And now we have Wells Fargo. And although the amounts of money are relatively low for these massive scandals that I just ticked off, only $185 million in fines and penalties so far, and $400 million in profits, but that's over a 5-year period generated by the bank. Mike, I think this may turn out to be one of the biggest compliance scandals around business ethics that we have seen. And I say that because everything is so black and white in this case. If I agree with you. At the table, we have a bank who's selling what I think everyone would certainly agree is the legal product, bank services, bank cards, loans, if not legal and certainly benign. They had a sales strategy which, although aggressive, was certainly legal, and I would even go so far as to say benign. But somehow when you put those two together, it all went wrong. So what are some of the things you see from the compliance officer angle?
Well, first of all, let me say I agree with the idea. This is a case worth studying, and exactly because, the big dollar figure might say, well, it's not that important. I agree with you completely. For folks who are listening, a terrific study guide to this case is something that Tom Fox did already. He wrote a 5-part series, which is comprehensive. He pulls together all the sources. I must say, Tom, this is something through the years I think nobody does it better, and here it is again. So I sort of, I also like the fact that I can, with Tom is very, very generous, so it's right there for the asking. You just need to go read it. So I read it, and it got me started. I wrote 2 blog posts about this. And Tom and I think agree on something that he just said, that, what exactly did they do criminally wrong here? The company I'm talking about. And that's a really important question. Because, of course, the opening of the accounts with the unauthorization, that might be consumer fraud or something. That was between 1% and 2% of the employees or the activity. So in terms of the company, Tom writes about this, I believe it's part 3, Tom, goes into detail that, yes, the company knew that they had a problem. And they were very active. According to the sources that Tom has, they were very active. Board knew, a lot of senior management knew. They brought in outside consultants. They brought in law firms. They did trainings. They emphasized their code of ethics. They did all that. So in terms of a company, they didn't go out to make a lot of money running a consumer scam. Quite the contrary. They went out to, in a kind of aggressive sales program, which from their point of view was a good thing, offering customers lots of services that they hoped that they needed. And on the margin somewhere, from their point of view, they had what I've called in my post collateral damage. This is a good sales program. We got some people who are not listening to us and are going too far to meet their quotas. We're doing everything we can to stop that. I'll leave it to some prosecutors, to say whether or not the company did anything criminally wrong. But Tom wrote about it in part 1. I want to go to something. I think it's really important, Tom. If you just bear with me 1 second. What was in their code of conduct? What would have happened if they had followed their code of conduct? We've seen their CEO dragged before Senate and dragged before the House. Tom, I was in my years of practice, I've seen it once or twice. I don't think I ever saw a CEO get raked over as much as he was.
Certainly not by both sides of the aisle.
Exactly. And really, in a bipartisan display of upset, the word the banks are still trying to get back in the good graces of the public. And here's a CEO who, Tom, I thought he was really heart-stricken. I really did. He worked there more than 35 years, came up through the ranks, really believed in his company. I think he was proud. And, of course, Wells Fargo, there's no better name in banking than Wells Fargo. And here he is being dragged before the American public and asked all kinds of really rough questions about, well, what were you people doing authorizing all these scams and stuff? And he said, we didn't authorize it. We tried to stop it. But nonetheless, the damage is done. At one point, Tom, listeners might enjoy looking at this. If you go to the tape of the House committee, which I watched, at around the time on the tape would be 12:45, he's asked a really good question. And basically it was, well, what would you do differently? What would, if you, in hindsight? And he answers, he says, well, there's a lot of, quote, introspection going on now at the top levels of Wells Fargo. And you know what? It wasn't worth it. I really caught me for a minute. I think he lost his public face for just a second. It gave kind of a window on a kind of heartfelt feeling like we're trying to figure this out. We're not sure ourselves what we did wrong. I think they were very slow to admit that they did anything wrong. And he says, it wasn't worth it. Tom, I wondered to myself, what do you mean it wasn't worth it? What was the it that he's talking about? So I don't know, Tom. I'd like to just quickly say something here. It's in part one of yours. It's in my post. The Wells Fargo Code of Ethics and Business Conduct. It's a logic tree called Making the Right Choice. Remember that? You remember
I
that
do.
there? I just want to just call this out for readers because they could have avoided a lot of grief, Tom, if the CEO who, as you said, his name is right there, his face, I believe, is on the cover of it. If they followed their own logic tree, here's what it says. Logic tree. 1, is it legal? 2, does it comply with our policies? 3, is it consistent with our values? Listen to this one. Is it consistent with our long-term goals and interests? Last, would I be comfortable with my decision if it's made public? If your answer to any of these is no, don't do it. If you believe more should be done, contact the Office of Ethics and Integrity. How about that last one, Tom? Would I be comfortable with my decision if it's made public?
Well, Mike, and that a couple of things that you said that really struck me. One is CEO John Stumpf's answer, it wasn't worth it. And here I would just note that the profit to Wells Fargo was reported to be $400,000 over a 5-year period.
Yeah.
So in terms of, and this was a $240 billion corporation. So it was not profitable, and I think you pointed it out in your most recent blog post. But the second thing is the decision tree, the logic tree in the Code of Conduct, I think really points to the larger question of who does the chief compliance officer, if not work for, certainly think about working with. And I think the logic tree even points us to the company, the public, and the prosecutors in this thinking through this, because the last decision you have to make is, would I be comfortable with my decision if it's made public? Yeah. And so that really speaks to, I think, the values and the culture of
beyond the
a company.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if we loop back to what we're going to be talking about at the FCPA Blog Conference at the end of the month, do it as a compliance officer, work for the public, work for the company, or work for a prosecutor. Take Wells Fargo. If I thought that way, and I don't think compliance officers should ever think to say that. I thought, well, what would the prosecutors do? Is that really the end of your inquiry? Like, let's say prosecutors are for criminal conduct, fairly serious, lots of evidence. If it doesn't meet a prosecutor's mindset, my job as a compliance officer is finished. Tom, I don't know too many people. I don't know if that's a great way to approach being a compliance officer.
Well, I certainly agree with that, but I would even add the caveat, Mike, that I don't know what a prosecutor would think because I've never been a prosecutor. I've always practiced on the civil side of things, and I know there are compliance officers and indeed chief compliance officers who come out of the Department of Justice, but they're in a very, very minority. Most of us come from the civil side of things, if not a general counsel's office, private practice on the civil side, Securities and Exchange Commission, once again, on the civil side of things. So compliance officers who come out of that milieu really are not going to understand what a prosecutor thinks. But
and I don't think they have to. I mean, if you go back to the Wells Fargo thing, and I hope that people listening to this, if they study Wells Fargo, you'll find it in Tom's piece. It's very clear that this is adopted by the board of directors. It's a code of conduct, and most of them are, I believe, Tom, adopted or approved by the board. It says in its own terms, it doesn't only apply to the rank and file, teller or branch employee. It applies to directors and all officers. It's very clear. So if you're working there, it applies to compliance officers. So my question about Wells Fargo and some of the senior management and the CEO and the officer who ran this thing and left with millions of dollars in bonuses, did you think that your code of conduct did not apply to you? It couldn't be clearer, like the one that you just picked up, Tom. Well, how would you feel if this was, put out into the public? And if you have a question, go to your officers in charge of this, which will be a compliance officer. That didn't come up much during the House and Senate. I really wish somebody would have asked them, do you think that the code of conduct adopted by your board is just paper compliance? Remember that, Tom, from the FCPA old days, paper compliance?
I do.
I don't know, Tom, what's your thought here? Is this just paper? It doesn't really apply to officers and directors. They don't have to go down the logic tree, especially when it's a big, important program, not something localized. Do they not have to go down the logic tree?
I think they certainly should, but let me maybe take it in a different direction, Mike.
Okay.
I've thought about the movie Mary Poppins in the context of Wells Fargo, and I don't know if you saw my post today, and I don't know how long it's been since you've seen Mary Poppins, but if you remember...
That's the best movie. That's the best movie.
Near the end of the movie, Mr. Banks takes his children to his place of employment, which is a bank. And he tries to get them, or one of the bank executives tries to get his children to put 3 tuppence in the bank for investment purposes. They want to use the tuppence to buy breadcrumbs for the birds. And so the little boy, Mr. Banks' son, gets in an argument and says, give me my money, don't take my money, I want my money. And bank customers overhear this, and they incorrectly assume that someone is trying to withdraw their money and can't get it.
Oh, my God.
And that leads to a run on the bank. And if you'll recall, It's a Wonderful Life, there was a run on the bank. As well.
Jimmy Stewart, run on the
Jimmy
bank.
Stewart.
Right.
And it really got me thinking that of all the major industries, the one that is run on trust is banking.
Yeah.
And if you think about, certainly your parents and your grandparents, and my parents and my grandparents believed that where you put your money, you could always get it out. And that was what banks sold. They were trusted institutions. They would take care of your money, and you would be able to withdraw it when you need it. Now, sometimes we had to have some help, such as in the Great Depression when we had a bank holiday, and then the FDIC was created to guarantee bank funds. But pharmaceutical companies...
You've got to trust your bank. You're not going to bank in a place where there's not a tremendous... Special banks are somehow special, like hospitals or something. They're really special.
Well, even pharmaceutical companies, medical suppliers, doctors... They don't sell trust. They sell helping people get better. And the pharmaceutical companies have gotten into trouble for their very large profits. It's not on trust. It's because we think they're in...
good point, Tom. I see that.
And even Volkswagen struck me that what Volkswagen forgot was that the cultural perception of a German-made manufactured auto is quality. And somehow Wells Fargo, and I probably am going to answer my own question, I know how they lost that understanding of what trust is because they're not a neighborhood bank. They're a $240 billion worldwide financial institution, of which commercial or consumer banking is a very small part. But people like you and I think the average American thinks of the bank, they think of trust. And I think Wells Fargo... that's the cultural component they lost, and that's what they violated.
Yes, I think that was pointed out to them by just many questions coming at them really, really hard on the issue of trust. Each representative said, well, in my district, Rhode Island, Delaware, Alabama, Mississippi, how many people of my constituents were affected by the way you breached your trust? And some of them had Wells Fargo mortgages, had been long-term customers, and they said exactly what you said. My trust in you is really diminished. But if you look back on this logic train, is it legal? Does it comply with our policies? Listen to this. Is it consistent with our values? Is it consistent with our long-term goals and interests? Our values, the value of trust. I mean, these codes are not there just for, being a Pollyanna do-good or something. They represent lessons that you just pointed out from Mary Poppins.
And Mike,
they're there for a reason.
Yeah, and I would even say that third prong, is it consistent with our long-term goals and interests? That even incorporates the business profit interest, so that it's a legitimate inquiry to make, is this action I'm about to take consistent or inconsistent with our financial goal to be profitable? And I see nothing wrong with that as a capitalist, but it's yet one other inquiry that apparently was not made.
So, Tom, let me draw you out on that for 1 second. It's troubled me for a bit that, who enforces this? It's called making the right choice. It's like you play any sport. We always have to have somebody who plays the game, and we have referees to keep the game going. In a company, who really, where does the buck stop in enforcing these codes of ethics that are set up by the board, not just to look good, not just to talk about, but because exactly the kind of things you're talking about. Right now, look what it led to in Wells Fargo. They knew they were being prosecuted criminally. The board knew. Your article points that out, and probably 3 of the 5 parts goes over this in detail. They knew they had a problem with the 1 or 2% who were, not breaching your ethics statement. So here's my question, Tom. Is it consistent with this code of ethics when they're sitting at the top and they understand they have a margin, they have a management problem from their point of view, collateral damage on the edge of an otherwise ongoing, a very aggressive sales quota system? If you can't get rid of that, those unauthorized accounts that keep happening, can you keep going with your over-aggressive sales program, or do you have to stop it?
Well, certainly, if I could kind of go back to part 1 of your question, who's responsible for this? I would say it's the person who's responsible to prevent, detect, and remediate. And I think that we will both agree that's the compliance function. So here we had, I think we had detection as far back as 2009, and we had a series of investigations. We had a series of internal employee surveys. We had financial transactional monitoring.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So we had the detection prong taken care of. Where they failed were on the prevent prong, they put in additional training, but they didn't remediate. So they didn't follow through with the 3 steps that any best practices compliance program would suggest that you take. So
let me ask this, Tom. I'm sorry, I'll let you finish. I jump in. Go ahead. Uh-huh.
So the question is, where did the disconnect come in my mind?
Okay, I think here's where one of the disconnect is. Let's imagine, hypothetically, this is a hypothetical, but, I've been in some of those rooms when I was an inside counsel as well as a compliance officer. I'm sure you have. You have a room full of very responsible, very hardworking executives who are looking at a serious management problem, okay? And somebody says, the only way that we're going to stop this 2% of unauthorized consumer scam going on is to stop the whole sales program and recalibrate. Let's see, somehow it's gone wrong. Sales programs that use quotas are a notorious minefield. There's a lot of thinking about that. How do you control it? Something is going wrong. The only way that we can stop this 2% of unauthorized sales continuing to go on is to call a halt to the whole program until we can go back over it. That's the moment, Tom. And that needed, I don't know what to say about that, but it seems to me in hindsight, that is what happened. They decided they had every right to run this program, sales program, kind of aggressive, very stiff quotas. Something was getting beyond them. They couldn't stop it just by disciplining and firing the employees who were doing it, because the source of it was the very cross-selling sales program with quota that was unmanageable. That's a very tough call. How you make that call? In my mind, it would be go back to your core values of trust and say, if this blows up, as it did, Tom, the public is not going to be willing to hear, well, it was only 2%. It wasn't the whole 98%. It was very profitable. We believe we were doing great things for our customers. Yeah, and it was on the margins of what we were really trying to do. Somebody would say, you think that you're not going to destroy public trust across the board with that explanation? We really need to debate that thoroughly, look at all the options, take it up to the board, and consistent with this making the right choice thing, really think maybe we need to stop the program for a while until we can figure out a better way to run and manage this thing. I've said a big statement. I don't know how you feel about that, Tom.
No, I really been thinking through it, and I guess the thing that struck me, Mike, is this is not a situation where Walmart was alleged to have made 20% annual profits out of their Mexico subsidiary. This is not a situation where GSK in China was going to have 20 to 30% of their worldwide sales out of China by 2012. This was $400,000 over 5 or 6 years. Yeah. $240 billion corporation. So, was it worth it? The answer financially is absolutely not.
Not.
And I read numbers that Wells Fargo had spent upwards of $60 million in pre-settlement investigations cost to kind of review all this. And at some point, someone should have said, we're getting 8 products. We're making, 6 years, that's $6,000 a year. Maybe we just ought to drop this whole sales incentive program. It's just not working financially for us.
Tom, you pointed this out in a terrific one part of that series, which I keep going back to because I think it's really a great place. Put aside the part that's had the most press and has the CEO in front of Congress explaining himself, unauthorized accounts, false credit cards, and the like. Go back to the sales program itself and the quota program, and you quote one of the employees who either quit or said, I'm not doing it, or got fired, said, quote, where are these sales quotas coming from? I thought that was a very interesting question. How do we? What should be the proper amount of the quota? Should depend on an analysis of what kind of customers we're talking about, where they live, what their incomes are, what kind of banking they have, and so forth. There's been nothing reported that the so-called legitimate side, and it is legitimate, legal side, may have been what I've called lawful but awful. If your quota is really set up on looking at kind of just one set of values, which is profitability and so forth, and doesn't blend in other things that you do for your customers, the quota may be too high. And I'm not excusing anybody who did illegal activity for what they did. There's no excuse for that. On the other hand, there's no excuse for management to ignore that they're creating an over-aggressive sales program that may be selling things in a legal way, but which is not good for their customers. We know this happens. Was that going on in this case? I don't know. You have to wonder. It hasn't been explored very much. If you did a sampling of the products and services that were sold over that long period of time, which is traced really well in your article, Tom, it goes, this went on for a long time. You brought in a really good consulting firm, and you did a sampling to determine were the products and services sold to customers really something that they needed or not, or were they really being sold to meet a quota? Isn't that a fair inquiry for a bank that's core values is trust? Shouldn't they be able to answer that question?
They should, and they should be asking it and answering it.
Yeah, ask and answer. With the ask part, I'm just going to plug something that I'm trying to get off the ground, Tom, in the discussion within the compliance field. I've written a couple of times. Compliance is people think, we're midway through. I don't know. I think we're in its infancy, Tom. I really do. There's so much yet to be made out of this extraordinary development. You have compliance officers now who are subject matter experts. They have sit in the C-suite. It's been restructured, and they have taking on more responsibilities. Well, here's one of them. I think they have to be working with lawyers, but in their own way, say, look, fellas, you all know me. We need to debate this. We really need to understand all of our values, including trust and what we're doing and really the questionable profitability here. The compliance officer has to be the subject matter expert on this, for example, in Wells Fargo, this code of ethics, and say, look, we need to debate this. we're not going to agree. We're going to have everybody come in. Marketing side, everybody comes in. The chief financial officer, everybody comes in. My job as a compliance officer is to kind of push you, nudge you, require you to debate what we're going to do, and then take it up to the board and have the board think about it's your code of conduct. We're trying to interpret it. We're not making a ton of money on this. We're not trying to do anything illegal, really. We're not paying bribes. It's not part of the program. But here we are. And our recommendation is consistent with our company's values and policies that we do X, Y, Z. But then the board decides. And when the board says, then okay, everybody gets in line. I think they might have avoided this whole scandal if they had done that back in time. When did this thing start? Like 2009, 11?
2009, January 2009.
I suggest that decision-making process, somebody has to own it, and somebody has to be empowered by the board to make sure it happens and bring it up, and have it debated, whether or not the conduct is criminal misconduct. As you've said, here's a bank dependent on trust. I'm sure the CEO is really sincere when he said, I wish we could walk this back. I wish we could, in introspection, it wasn't worth it. Yeah, I agree with you. It wasn't worth it. So that's a sort of issue here that, is this something that the compliance profession needs to take on, the lawful but awful situation? And how are we just going to throw up our hands and say, look, it's too amorphous, we can't figure this out? And I don't think any compliance officer should be applying his political views, left, right, or center, his moral and religious convictions, or his personal convictions. Then we get nowhere. But I think we can say that every company has core values that are established by the board, and those values a compliance officer should enforce and not his own. So that's my pitch these days, Tom. I think Wells Fargo is a good application, maybe.
No, I think there's no maybe to it, Mike. And for those listening, if you're going to be in New York on October 26th, I hope that you would consider coming to the FCPA Blog Conference, where Mike and I will continue this conversation live and in person with Julie DeMarno. And Mike, once again, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to be with me.
Tom. Thank you very, very much. I look forward to getting up on the stage with you. And, on the question time, they've given us three. Does a compliance officer, do you work for the public? Do you work for the company? Do you work for the prosecutor? I suggest that there's another one that should be on that list that might be the most important to compliance officers, but I'm not going to tell you now, Tom. I want to surprise you with it when we're on the panel together. Is that okay with you, Tom?
It is, but what I think I'm going to do, Mike, is I'm going to take the 4-part decision tree from Wells Fargo and say this answers our question, because all of our obligations are in here as compliance officers. Because I see every constituency embedded in those 4 questions.
I love that. That's great. Tom, you need to do a 4-part series on your 5-part series. Start right there.
All right, Mike. Well, thanks a lot.
Tom. Thank you again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. I have 2 calls to action for you. The first is, if you would listen to this on iTunes, if you could rate this podcast, it would greatly help us in our rankings. The second thing is, if you have any questions, please email them to me on developing my next mailbag episode. And finally, I hope you will join Mike and I, along with Dick Casson and the rest of the group, at the FCPA Blog Conference in New York City on October 26, 2016. You can check out more information at thefcpablog.com, check out events, and check out the show notes for this episode to get a 20% discount. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report.